We are pleased to welcome John Daugherty back to the sanctuary this morning. Thank you. That was beautiful. Our opening words this morning are by Nicole Kay and are entitled, "We Gather to Remember." We gather to remember those who could not grow old and those forced to grow old long before their time. We gather to mourn and grieve with one another all of our losses, the people, the stories, the loved ones, and the futures that could have been. We gather to do the hard work of facing the difficult realities of our present and our past, where there is conflict, violence, war, and hatred. We gather to hold space for silence as we try to make meaning of our history to help us work for peace and justice today. We gather to rekindle our source of hope for our future by recognizing in one another our shared humanity as we join in a concerted commitment for a better tomorrow. We gather because we need community to do all of this holy work. If you would please rise and join me in singing our opening hymn. It's number 315, "This Old World." I don't think we've done this hymn recently. I'm going to surprise Gary just a little bit and ask him to play it one time through for us, pretty please, and then we'll sing all 4 verses. Please rise as you are willing and able. You all sound wonderful this morning. I'm going to ask Beth Curtis to come forward to do our story for all ages, our time for all ages. And I left the clicker over there. So, Beth? I'm going to click the one.
Good morning. Memorial Day is one of America's most important, yet sad and somber holidays. On the final Monday of May each year, we honor the soldiers known and unknown who gave their lives serving the United States military in the fight of freedom and democracy. Before it had the name Memorial Day, it was known as Decoration Day. After the Civil War, people decorated soldiers' graves with flowers and flags so that they would not be forgotten. In 1868, 3 years after the Civil War ended, General John Logan issued an order declaring Decoration Day should be celebrated every spring. The first official Decoration Day took place at Arlington National Cemetery on May 30th, 1868. About 5,000 people gathered to decorate the gravestones of 20,000 Union and Confederate Civil War soldiers. As time went on, Decoration Day also became known as Memorial Day and was expanded to include the fallen troops, not just those of the Civil War, but of all wars. In 1971, Memorial Day became a federal holiday. Now, this isn't the only origin story of Memorial Day. There's an important alternative story involving Black American history, which, thanks to professor and author David Blight, was rediscovered while he was researching his book on Civil War. This story involves a community of Black residents in Charleston, South Carolina, that were determined to thank, celebrate, and commemorate and lay to rest those who fought for their freedom, including the colored infantry of the Union Army. The Civil War effectively ended in April 1865 when Confederate General Lee surrendered his troops to Union General Grant in Virginia. Charleston, South Carolina, like so many cities, lay in waste, having been bombarded and burned. There were actually very few white folks left in the area. The Confederate Army had retreated, and most of the white residents had fled. In the last year of the war, a horse track in Charleston had become the mass grave of upwards of 260 soldiers. These soldiers were Union soldiers and died as they were held as prisoners of war under horrific conditions. Days after peace was declared, for an estimated 2 weeks, Black residents, mostly former slaves, who remained in the area, gave the fallen soldiers a proper burial. And they built a fence around the newly blessed cemetery, which had an arched entry, was emblazoned with the words, "Martyrs of the Racecourse." Now, very soon after, on May 1st, 1865, an estimated 10,000 residents, mostly Black, including 3,000 African American school-age children carrying arms loaded with roses, commemorated the soldiers with a day filled of sermons, singing, and military drills held at the cemetery by the famed 54th Black Union Regiment. Many stayed after the service and picnicked, a precursor to how we celebrate our holiday. Within 50 years, locals would deny that these events ever took place. But fortunately, clippings were found providing documentation. Nonetheless, the origin of Memorial Day truly belongs to Charleston's freed men and women who created for themselves and for those who followed the revered holiday that we know today.
Good morning once again. I am Jennifer Bacmeister. I'm a member here at Buckman Bridge, and I will be your worship leader this morning. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I hope it is a 3-day weekend or maybe a 4 or 5-day weekend for you if you have that opportunity. I don't. I just get tomorrow off. Welcome to Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church, or BBUUC, as we fondly call it. It saves so much time, right? We get like 6 syllables back in our day every time we shorten it. Unitarian Universalism is a faith that aspires to be a truthful, serving, spiritual, and loving community. We believe that facing and enjoying this real and known world with integrity is preferable to yearning for an imagined and unknown one later on. We believe that we are not sufficient unto ourselves, but are interdependent, that we are called to treat tenderly and justly the entire universe and all beings that live within it. We believe in reason rather than revelation, and the beliefs that we hold are not so much revealed to us, but experienced by us. We encourage our children who just left to develop their own working wisdoms instead of simply inheriting the truths of others. And if you hang around here long enough, sometimes they bring their truths to us, which is enlightening and helpful because I don't have time all the time. For us, love is not an abstraction or a platitude. Our purpose on earth is not only to discuss love, although we do like that part. Don't knock the discussion parts, but to embody love. Welcome one and all to our Unitarian Universalist community. We welcome you, whoever you are, whatever tradition, gender, race, sexual orientation, or age you represent. Through all your days and nights in our presence, may you experience love. If you're interested in learning more about UU in general or our congregation in particular, please check at the welcome table by the front door for information about our Learn About Us classes. We encourage any visitors to stop and get a name tag so that we may know you by name. I'm a terrible example because I did not put mine on this morning, but I think everybody here's got theirs on. So do like y'all do, not like I've done. And everybody, please stay after this service for beverages and refreshments, which includes sparkling conversations. We'll have it in the back. And I see there's cake, so it must be birthdays. Is that why we have cake? Anniversaries. Oh, we have a good one. I'm not going to say because there's probably something later on. I'm not going to spoil a surprise. There's an anniversary later. As a creedless faith, the members of this church are joined together in a covenantal relationship, which we individually and collectively enter into with intention. Each Unitarian Universalist congregation chooses how they will express their vision of covenant. So each Sunday, we speak the words of our covenant together, both as a reminder and an expression of our faith in our fellow congregants. The words are printed in your order of service. If you would please recite our congregational covenant with me this morning. We covenant to engage one another with honesty, kindness, and respect, to value diversity, seek understanding of our differences, and practice gracious accountability with care, love, and empathy. We make these promises to those who are here and those yet to come, so that we may be a safe, welcoming, and beloved community of acceptance, learning, and transformation. It's going to be a day because I looked at what I had on the paper and I almost read with cake love. They shouldn't put that out where I can see it. It's with cake. I know we have cake, that's the problem. I'm going to ask Adele Del Savio to come forward this morning and illuminate our chalice. The words this morning were written by Joan Javier Duval. You are beloved and you are welcome here. Whether tears have fallen from your eyes this past week or gleeful laughter has spilled out of your smiling mouth, whether you are feeling brave or brokenhearted, defiant or defeated, fearsome or fearful, whether you have untold stories buried deep inside or stories that have been forced beyond the edges of comfort, you are beloved and you are welcome here. Whether you have made promises, broken promises, or are renewing your promises, whatever is on your heart, however it is with your soul at this moment, you are beloved and you are welcome here. In this space of welcome and acceptance, commitment and recommitment of covenant and connection, let us worship together. Thank you, Adele. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing our call to worship. The words are printed in your order of service. I can't not come to church when he's here. Every week in our church, we take up an offering. It is good to remind ourselves from time to time that the offering is symbolic as well as practical. We know that it's through pledges that we build our budget and fund our programs and ministries, pay our staff, pay for the musicians, and finance the comfort and beauty of our building and grounds. And we know that we could easily submit those pledge checks and donations to the church at any convenient time. We have QR codes and websites and automatic deposits from our phones now, but we pass the plate during our worship service to make a community expression of thanks for the blessings of abundance, to visibly bring in the harvest at this most cherished hour of the week. Our offering says that the act of giving is as essential to our spiritual well-being as anything else we do here on Sunday mornings. So even if during the ritual your offering is only symbolic, please take the plate and pass it to your neighbor. Our offertory ushers will help us cross the gaps in the aisles. Patty DeStefano and John Wrightington will now come forward to gather the offering. And at the completion of the offering, please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.
We've been graced with several video sermons by Reverend Kaaren Anderson over the past year. You may remember her introduction to us, Subway Jesus, or Why Can't I Read This about book banning. Today, she's given us To Share Their Burdens, a sermon for Memorial Day for me to share with you. It begins with a reading by the great novelist and essayist Tim O'Brien. It's from what is possibly his most famous book, The Things They Carried. And it's from a short story called How to Tell a True War Story. He writes, "A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. Reverend Anderson begins. It's like going into a deep forest without a map. He said, once you're in the forest, it's easy to lose your bearings and very unlikely you'll ever exit the same way you came in. It's clear right away that you're on a different journey than the one you thought you'd be taking, than the one you were told you'd be taking. It's not even clear if it's a journey anymore. Mainly, it's a matter of keeping yourself moving. This is what my husband Scott's divinity school professor had to say about war. Scott says he only talked about his military service 2 or 3 times, and each time it caught him off guard. It was hard to think of him as a soldier. His gentle way and his slight build fit the image of a theology professor perfectly, but it didn't in any way match the stereotypes of an army sergeant. But then again, if you paid attention, there were visible signs of his service. Scott says he carried a weight, something heavy, something not easily communicated or shared. The best he could do was talk about a forest. Never a story about the actual events, just this metaphor of being lost in a forest. I start this morning with this story about Scott's divinity school professor because it seems to me that Memorial Day is largely about stories. Or maybe it's better to say it's about being visited by stories. Here's another story from Scott. He grew up in the Church of the Brethren, which is one of the 4 historic peace churches, the Amish, the Mennonite, the Quaker, and the Church of the Brethren. Anyway, when he was in college at a Quaker school, he led a Quaker youth group, and part of that role was to help juniors and seniors in high schools wrestle with whether or not to register as conscientious objectors. To assist with that, a number of veterans were invited to come and talk to the youth. The lieutenant with the Purple Heart made the biggest impression. He said he was proud of the medal, but he also called it a burden. It's not easy to wear, he said, because it lies. It tells the truth about one story, but certainly not the truth about the whole story. For instance, it doesn't tell of the night I purposefully slowed my pace and pulled back just enough so others could lead and possibly take a bullet instead of me. I have to carry that story alone. The final story I want to share is something a friend of ours told us years back. Our friend served in Afghanistan. He told us about the cognitive dissonance a good friend of his in the army felt when he was welcomed home. He lived in a small town, and after coming back from serving in Iraq, they held a dinner and a ceremony for him, a hero's welcome, basically. The soldier confessed he'd felt sick throughout the entire thing. Heroics weren't involved, he said. I never engaged the enemy, not even once. I just cleaned up bodies, a lot of innocent bodies. Planes dropped bombs, people died. I cleaned it up. To call it heroic just doesn't make any sense. Again, Tim O'Brien writes, A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted or you feel some small bit of rectitude that's been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. So, here's my question this morning. In the light of O'Brien's guidance about a true war story, and in light of the stories that visited me, and perhaps some of you, the stories that have visited you all week, in remembrance of those who have served on the front lines somewhere, how does one give a true Memorial Day sermon? Or, to widen it so it clearly includes all of us, how does a congregation participate in a true Memorial Day service? In trying to answer this for myself, that lieutenant's story about his Purple Heart has been the best guide. What my husband Scott heard him say that night was, the story of medals and ribbons and heroes is never enough. Alone, that is never true. Or to put it another way, celebration is not enough. It doesn't redeem the burden carried by soldiers as much as it forces them to bury it and carry it alone. And so given this, it seems to me that a true Memorial Day service must, above all, address and even try to heal the burden, this burden, that soldiers carry alone. Lawrence LeShan is a psychologist, and he's made the burdens of servicemen and women his life's work. He says that in order to understand war and the impact of war, the first thing one has to do is to make a distinction between mythic reality and sensory reality. War requires mythic reality, he says. Without it, societies and individuals simply wouldn't engage in war. Indeed, they can't engage in war. A story needs to be created and told that enables us to relate to war as something other than organized murder. Stories that lift up the idea of the human race need to be dissolved and reshaped into a story about tribes. And these need to be tribes not only of us and them, but also enemies and heroes. Killing needs to be reframed as fighting for all that is true and just. Armies need to be seen not simply as masses of effectively trained men and women, but as tools and even as servants of the mythic forces of good and evil. Simply put, mythic reality is not so much reality as the story we wrap around reality. Sensory reality, says Dr. LeShan, is something very different. It is the direct, more unmediated experience itself. It is blood, it is death. It's not so much the meaning of blood and death. It is a man in uniform different from your own, lying on the ground, crying out for his mother, asking you, the one who shot him, for help. It is looking into his eyes and seeing human pain, not an inhuman other. Sensory reality is being engaged in a gunfight without a thought of God, of country, goodness in your mind, only the single goal of trying to keep yourself and your fellow soldiers alive. It is not the meaning of the war, but the specific actions and moments that make up the war. Sensory reality is what Tim O'Brien is talking about when he refers to experience that doesn't instruct or uplift, but simply is. Experience that sits there and refuses to redeem itself. Sensory reality is the reality of those who fight wars. Mythic reality is the reality of the rest of us who talk and think about war. And here's the hardest part of what Lawrence Lashan has to say. He says that those of us who live in and off of mythic reality want to keep it that way. It's not malicious. It's not even necessarily even conscious. When it comes to war, no human being wants to face the sensory reality of it. The desire to buffer yourself from the obscenity and the terror of war is natural. It's understandable. Military personnel simply have no choice. The rest of us do. They can't avoid the directness, the reality of it all. We can, and thus, the gap between the warrior and those who send the warrior to battle looms very large. There's a scene in the World War II film Saving Private Ryan that gets at this gap. Tom Hanks' character is talking about the relationship between war and home. "So I guess I've changed," he said. "Sometimes I wonder if I've changed so much my wife is even going to recognize me whenever it is I get back to her, and how I'll ever be able to tell her about days like today. I just know that every man I kill, the farther away from home I feel." Hank's character puts the emphasis here on how the killing on the battlefield distances him from home. I think it's also important to recognize that this is only part of what causes that distance. What happens back home also widens the gap. During wartime, those of us back home aren't passive. We aren't just waiting for our loved ones to return. We are, knowingly or not, active. We too are engaging war, albeit in a radically different way than those in battle. We are telling stories. We're choosing bumper stickers. We're designing rituals. We're decorating our porches. We again, knowingly or not, are telling ourselves a story about what war is. We are creating a reality to live in. And I think if we are honest, if we are able to be honest, we have to admit that the reality most actively cultivated and created is a mythic one. In other words, while our soldiers are away, we as a country aren't engaged in an activity that brings us closer to those who serve. Instead, we're involved in an activity that ultimately separates us from them. The truth, the hard and tragic truth of what happens at home in wartime is not that we stand by our troops, but that we systematically build walls, mythic walls, to protect ourselves from our troops. Their reality, their sensory reality, is the last thing our fragile hearts and minds want to experience. So, here's the thing. If a Memorial Day service is committed to truth, if it is to be a true Memorial Day service, it must be the opposite of mythic. It must be loyal to what has been imprisoned inside. It must be loyal to making sure that what is able to come out, that what is inside is able to come out, is able to be shared, which is all a way of saying that I believe a true Memorial Day service is as much about us as it is about those who have died in service. A true Memorial Day experience, I believe, doesn't simply honor the sacrifices made by military men and women. It also calls on the rest of us to make a sacrifice out of respect, out of honor, out of gratitude, even love for those who have served. I think we are called to sacrifice and resist the comfort and protection granted to us by mythic reality. I mentioned a moment ago how we back home knowingly and unknowingly create a mythic reality about war that keeps us at a safe distance from the painful reality of war and our soldiers who can't distance themselves from it. Recognizing the creative story building part of this highlights, I think, that the way out must also be creative. Or to put it another way, our way out must involve new, creative storytelling, finding new stories that minimize and heal the gap between those of us who are civilians back home and those of us who served. And for me, here's a great news story to do just that. I learned a couple of years ago that in medieval times, some communities welcomed their soldiers home in a radically different way than we welcome them home today. Instead of being welcomed home with a parade and decked out in neatly pressed uniforms decorated with medals, returning military, alive and dead, were stopped outside the village gates. With the entire community in attendance, the soldiers were stripped of their uniforms, tenderly washed by the hands of the villagers, given new clothes. Those soldiers who made it home alive were then asked to kneel. The religious leaders invited and heard their confessions and offered the assurance of forgiveness. The villagers then also knelt and also asked for forgiveness in acknowledgement that what had been done was ultimately done by all. Now, all of this was explained in a radio interview. The person being interviewed was a military chaplain. He concluded by saying that what the medieval communities understood in a way that we simply don't is that what military men and women need most upon their return from war is not a community that celebrates you like a hero and excuses all the terrible things you did, but a community that commits itself to looking at and sharing the burden of what was done. Those communities offered their soldiers so much more than just celebration, he said. In struggling to see and help carry their burdens, they offered love. So, friends, on this Memorial Day, may we remember to create new storylines that help heal the divide. And may we remember that by creating a new storyline that involves all of us, we, in some small way, may actually help heal all of us. So be it. Amen. The words of Reverend Kaaren Anderson.
Thank you, David. If you would please rise and join me in singing our closing hymn, number 159. This is my song. We will sing all verses of it, and then please remain standing. Adele will return to the pulpit, and we will read the benediction and extinguish the chalice. Spirit of life, whom we have called by many names in thanksgiving and in anguish, bless the poets and those who mourn. Send peace for the soldiers who did not make the wars, but whose lives were consumed by them. Let strong trees grow above the graves far from home. Breathe through the arms of their branches. The earth will swallow your tears while the dead sing, no more, never again. Remember me. For the wounded ones and those who receive them back, let there be somebody ready when the memories come, when the scars pull and the buried metal moves, and forgiveness for those of us who were not there for our ignorance. And in us, veterans in a forest of 1,000 fallen promises, let new leaves of protest grow on our stumps. Give us courage to answer the cry of humanity's pain, and with our bare hands out of full hearts, with all our intelligence, let us create the peace. May it be so. Blessed be.